The morning sun painted everything golden as it rose over the massive estate. Robert Chen stood by his bedroom window, already dressed in his expensive suit, checking his phone for the 100th time that morning. 3 meetings before noon, a conference call with Tokyo at 2, and a flight to London that evening. This was his life now. Always moving, always working, always somewhere else. He glanced at the photo on his nightstand. His late wife, Catherine, smiled back at him, her arm around their daughter on her 5th birthday. 2 years had passed since the cancer took her. 2 years of trying to fill the emptiness with work, with deals, with building his technology company into something even bigger. But no amount of success could bring her back or erase the guilt he felt every time. He looked at their daughter. 7-year-old Sophie was probably already awake, he thought. She was an early riser, just like her mother had been. But Robert wouldn't see her this morning. He never did anymore. By the time he finished his calls and emails, she would be at breakfast with her nanny. By the time he returned from London next week, she would have lived 7 more days of her childhood. Without him, he pushed the thought away and headed downstairs to his office. There was too much to do, too many people depending on him. The company had 60,000 employees worldwide. Sophie had a whole team of people taking care of her. She would be fine. Meanwhile, in the east wing of the house, Rosa Martinez was already at work. She had been up since 5 in the morning, just like every day for the past 3 years. The massive house needed constant attention, and Rosa was responsible for the main living areas. She moved quietly through the rooms, her cleaning cart rolling softly over the marble floors. Rosa knew every corner of this house. She knew which floorboards creaked, which windows stuck in humid weather, and which rooms stayed cold no matter how high they turned up the heat. She knew where Mr. Chun kept his reading glasses that he was always losing. And she knew that little Sophie liked to hide her vegetables under her napkin at dinner. But Mr. Chun didn't know Rosa, not really. He had probably signed the paperwork when the housekeeping agency sent her 3 years ago, but she doubted he remembered. To him, she was just part of the machinery that kept his life running smoothly. Someone who appeared and disappeared like magic, leaving everything clean and perfect. Rosa didn't mind being invisible. She had learned long ago that wealthy people rarely saw the help. Back in her village in Guatemala, she had been somebody. She had been a teacher with her own classroom, respected by parents, loved by children. But teaching didn't pay enough to support her family. Not after her husband died in the construction accident. So she had made the hardest decision of her life. She had left her 2 children with her mother and traveled north to find work. The money she sent home every month paid for her kids' school fees, bought them clothes and food, kept a roof over their heads. Every Sunday, she video called them on her old phone, watching them grow up through a screen, missing everything. Her daughter Anna was 11 now, getting tall and serious. Her son Luis was 9, still silly and sweet. They asked her every week when she was coming home. She told them soon, always soon, even though she didn't know if it was true. The truth was too hard to say out loud. The truth was she might miss their entire childhood to give them a better future. As Rosa dusted the family photos in the hallway, she paused at a picture of Sophie. The little girl had the same sad eyes Rosa saw in her own children's faces during their video calls. The eyes of a child who missed someone who wasn't there. Rosa had started noticing Sophie about a year ago. Really noticing her? The girl was always alone, even though the house was full of people. The nanny, Helen, was professional but distant. She followed her schedule exactly, made sure Sophie was fed and bathed and on time for her online tutoring sessions. But she didn't play with her. She didn't laugh with her. Sophie spent hours in the garden talking to herself, creating elaborate imaginary worlds. Sometimes Rosa would watch from the windows as she cleaned, her heart breaking a little. The girl reminded her so much of Liz, who used to play the same way before Rosa left. He had stopped playing pretend games now. Anna said he had gotten quiet, more withdrawn. Rosa knew she shouldn't get attached. She had learned that lesson before. 3 years ago, when she first arrived, she had tried to be friendly with Sophie. She had smiled at her, asked her about her day. But Helen had pulled her aside and explained that the staff were not supposed to interact personally with the family. Professional boundaries, she had said. Mr. Chun preferred it that way. So Rosa had stepped back. She did her job and stayed invisible. But she couldn't help the small rebellions. When she cleaned Sophie's room, she sometimes left a piece of candy on the pillow. Nothing expensive, just a small treat from the corner store. She noticed Sophie started leaving her drawings on the desk where Rosa would see them. Neither of them ever mentioned these silent exchanges. Sometimes, during her lunch break, Rosa would sit in the kitchen and Sophie would wander in, supposedly looking for a snack. Rosa would make her a quesadilla the way she made them for her own children, with extra cheese and perfectly crisp. They would sit together for 15 minutes, not talking much, but something passing between them that felt like comfort. If Helen knew about these lunches, she didn't say anything today. As Rosa cleaned the study, she could hear Mr. Chun on the phone in the next room. His voice carried through the walls. He was discussing another trip, this one 2 weeks long. Tokyo, Singapore, Dubai. His assistant was running through his schedule. Rosa thought about Sophie, who would barely see her father before he left again. She finished dusting and moved to the windows, looking out at the garden where Sophie was already playing. The girl was by the fountain, making two dolls have a conversation. Even from here, Rosa could tell the story was about a mother and daughter. Her chest tightened. What kind of world was this, Rosa wondered, where she had left her children to take care of someone else's child, and that child's parent was too busy to notice either of them. Everyone was alone, everyone was missing someone, and all the money in the world couldn't fix it. She thought about her own mother, watching Anna and Louise while battling arthritis, her hands getting more twisted every year. She thought about Anna, who was starting to look like a young woman now, dealing with problems Rosa should be there to help with. She thought about Louise, who had stopped asking when she was coming home, and she thought about Sophie, who had everything except what she needed most. Rosa finished the windows and moved on to the next room. There was always more work to do. The house was too big, too empty, despite all the people in it. She would clean it perfectly, make it shine, and tomorrow it would need cleaning again. This was her life now. This was everyone's life in this house. Going through the motions, playing their roles, all of them lonely in different ways. None of them knew that in just a few days everything would change. A moment of terror would tear through their careful routines and force them all to see each other clearly for the first time. Rosa would make a choice that would alter the course of multiple lives. But for now, she just pushed her cart to the next room and kept working. Invisible and alone, like always. The garden party was Robert's idea, though he had no intention of actually enjoying it. His business partner had suggested it months ago. Good for appearances, he had said. Show the investors and board members that you're not just a workaholic robot. Show them you have a life, a home, a family. So Robert had agreed, and his assistant had organized everything. A catering company, a string quartet, perfectly trimmed hedges, and 200 guests who didn't really care about him but loved the chance to see inside a billionaire's estate. Robert hated every minute of it, but he smiled and shook hands and made small talk about the stock market and the weather. Sophie wore a new dress for the occasion, pale blue with white flowers. Helen had picked it out and done her hair in neat braids. The girl looked beautiful but uncomfortable, tugging at the fancy fabric. She wasn't used to crowds or parties. She stood near the refreshment table, watching the adults talk and laugh. Looking like she wished she could disappear, Rosa had been working since dawn, helping the catering staff set up. She wasn't supposed to be visible during the party, but they needed extra hands to keep the drinks flowing and the food tables stocked. She wore her plain black uniform and moved between the guests like a shadow. Refilling champagne glasses and clearing away empty plates, she kept one eye on Sophie the whole time. The girl had wandered away from Helen, who was chatting with the other nannies near the rose garden. Sophie had drifted toward the hedge maze at the far edge of the property, probably looking for somewhere quiet to escape. Rosa wanted to go to her, to tell her it would be over soon, but she couldn't. Not here. Not with all these people watching. So she just kept track of where the girl went, making sure she stayed in sight. The afternoon sun was hot and bright. Guests fanned themselves and sought shade under the white tents. The string quartet played something classical that nobody really listened to. Robert was trapped in a conversation with three investors who wanted to talk about the Asian market. He nodded and said the right things, but his mind was already on his flight that evening. That's when Rosa heard it. A sound that made her blood turn cold, barking, aggressive, deep, furious barking. She turned toward the sound, her tray of champagne glasses forgotten. Her heart started pounding before her brain even registered what she was seeing. A huge dog was racing across the lawn, its muscular body low to the ground, moving with terrible purpose. It was a Rottweiler, massive and dark, and it had gotten through a gap in the fence somehow. The animal's lips were pulled back, showing its teeth. Its eyes were fixed on something. Locked on target, Rosa's eyes followed the dog's path and her stomach dropped. Sophie, the girl, was standing near the hedge maze, frozen, her small body rigid with fear. She had seen the dog. She knew it was coming for her. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion and too fast at the same time. The guests started screaming. People backed away, bumping into each other, knocking over chairs. The security guards were on the other side of the lawn, too far away, fumbling with their radios. Helen started running toward Sophie, her face white with terror, but she was at least 30 feet away. She would never make it in time. Nobody would make it in time. The dog was too fast, covering the ground in powerful strides. Rosa didn't think. There was no time to think. Her body just moved. She dropped the tray. Glass shattered on the stone patio. She kicked off her shoes because they would slow her down. And she ran faster than she had ever run in her entire life. Her lungs burned. Her legs pumped. The world narrowed to just this. Just the distance between her and Sophie. Just the terrible math of whether she could get there before the dog did. She heard people shouting behind her, but their words were meaningless noise. There was only Sophie's terrified face and the dog's snarling rage and Rosa's body moving. Moving. She reached Sophie half a second before the dog did. Just half a second. It was enough. Rosa grabbed the girl and spun, putting herself between the child and the animal. She felt Sophie's small body against her back, heard the girl's sharp gasp of fear. And then the dog was there, launching itself at them. 120 pounds of muscle and fury slammed into Rosa's chest. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She went down hard, hitting the grass with the dog on top of her. Pain exploded through her shoulder where the dog's paws struck her. She could feel its hot breath on her face, could see its teeth inches from her throat, but Rosa didn't freeze. Growing up in rural Guatemala, she had dealt with aggressive dogs before. Strays, guard dogs, animals protecting territory. She knew that showing fear made it worse. She knew that the first few seconds were everything. As she fell, she twisted her body and grabbed for the dog's collar. Her fingers caught thick leather and she held on with everything she had. The dog thrashed, trying to shake her off, trying to get its jaws around her arm or her throat or anything it could reach. Rosa pulled the collar tight, using her weight to pin the dog partially beneath her. The animal was incredibly strong. It bucked and twisted, its claws scratching at her arms, leaving burning lines of pain. Rosa could feel her grip slipping. Her arms shook with the effort of holding on. But she couldn't let go. If she let go, the dog would go for Sophie. She started talking to the animal in Spanish, her voice coming out in gasps. Firm words, commanding words, the same tone she had used on the farm dogs back home. She didn't know if it would work, but she had to try something. Her arms were giving out. She could feel blood running down her forearm, where the dog's claws had torn through her sleeve. The guests were screaming. Rosa could hear Helen crying Sophie's name. She could hear heavy footsteps running toward them. But the sound seemed to come from very far away. Her whole world had shrunk to this struggle, this fight to keep the animal away from the child behind her. Sophie was crying, her small hands gripping Rosa's uniform, but she had the sense to stay back. Good girl, Rosa thought. Smart girl. Stay away. The dog's jaws snapped inches from Rosa's face. She jerked her head back, still holding the collar. Still talking in that firm, steady voice, even though her arm screamed in pain and her heart hammered. So hard she thought it might burst. Then the security guards were there. 3 of them, pulling at the dog, trying to separate it from Rosa. One of them had a catch pole. looping it around the dog's neck. The animal turned its aggression toward them, snapping and snarling. Finally, releasing its focus on Rosa, she let go of the collar and rolled away, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her arms were a mess of scratches, bleeding through her torn uniform. Her shoulder throbbed where the dog had hit her. She could taste blood in her mouth from where she had bitten her own lip, but she had done it. Sophie was safe. The little girl threw herself at Rosa, wrapping her arms around her neck, sobbing into her shoulder. Rosa held her with trembling arms, trying to catch her breath, trying to stop shaking. She could feel the girl's tears soaking into her torn uniform, over Sophie's shoulder. Rosa saw Robert Chun standing 20 feet away. He had been on the far side of the lawn when it happened. Now he stood frozen, his face completely white, staring at her and his daughter with an expression Rosa couldn't read. Horror, maybe. Or shock. Or something else entirely. The security team had the dog under control now, pulling it away toward the service gate. Guests clustered in small groups, talking in hushed, excited voices. Helen rushed over, trying to take Sophie from Rosa's arms, but the girl wouldn't let go. Rosa's adrenaline was crashing. She felt dizzy, sick. Her arms hurt so badly she wanted to cry. But Sophie was safe. That was all that mattered. Sophie was alive and unhurt, pressed against her. Holding on like Rosa was the only solid thing in a spinning world. And Robert Chun was still staring at them. Something fundamental shifting behind his eyes. Though Rosa was too shaken to understand what it meant, the paramedics arrived within 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Rosa sat on a chair someone had brought from the patio, her torn uniform sticking to her skin, her arms throbbing with pain. Sophie refused to leave her side, sitting on the ground next to the chair. Holding Rosa's hand with both of hers, Helen tried again to pull the girl away, saying the paramedics needed space to work, but Sophie just shook her head and held on tighter. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, her fancy dress rumpled and grass-stained. She looked up at Rosa like she was afraid that if she looked away, Rosa might disappear. The paramedics cleaned Rosa's wounds, which looked worse than they actually were. Long scratches ran down both forearms where the dog's claws had caught her. Her shoulder was already turning purple from the impact. Her hands were scraped raw from gripping the collar. But nothing was broken. Nothing needed stitches. She had been incredibly lucky. One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, kept asking Rosa if she wanted to go to the hospital for a proper examination. Rosa kept saying no. She couldn't afford an ambulance ride or an emergency room bill. Her housekeeping job provided basic insurance, but the deductible was more than she made in a month. Robert Chun appeared at her side. Rosa hadn't noticed him approach. He looked shaken, his expensive suit somehow rumpled despite being perfectly pressed. His hands were trembling slightly. "Take her to the hospital," he said to the paramedics. His voice was hoarse. "Whatever it costs, bill me directly. Run every test. Make sure she's okay." The paramedic looked at Rosa, waiting for her consent. Rosa wanted to refuse. She didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to owe him anything. But her shoulder hurt badly and her head was starting to pound. "Maybe they should check for a concussion," she nodded. Robert insisted on riding in the ambulance with them. Sophie came too, still refusing to let go of Rosa's hand. Helen followed in one of the estate's cars with a change of clothes for Sophie. The garden party had dissolved into chaos, guests leaving in clusters, everyone on their phones, already spreading the story. At the hospital, they took Rosa for X-rays and a CT scan. Everything came back clear. No broken bones, no internal injuries, no concussion. Just bruising and the scratches, which they cleaned thoroughly and bandaged. They gave her a tetanus shot and a prescription for antibiotics in case of infection. The doctor told her she was remarkably fortunate and incredibly brave. Rosa didn't feel brave. She felt tired and sore and overwhelmed. She kept thinking about what could have happened. If she had been 1 second slower, if the dog had gotten past her, if Sophie had been hurt or worse. Her hands started shaking again, and she couldn't make them stop. A nurse brought her to a private recovery room to rest before discharge. Sophie was there, sitting in a chair that was too big for her, wearing the clean clothes Helen had brought. The girl's eyes were red from crying. The moment Rosa entered, Sophie jumped up and hugged her carefully. Avoiding the bandaged arms, Robert stood by the window, staring out at the parking lot. He had been quiet since they arrived at the hospital, just watching everything with that same stunned expression. Now he turned to look at Rosa. "I need to thank you," he said. His voice cracked. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my daughter's life." Rosa didn't know what to say. She had just done what anyone would do, what any mother would do. But looking at his face, she realized he didn't believe that. He thought what she had done was extraordinary. Maybe it was. Maybe most people would have frozen or run away. Rosa didn't know. She just knew she had seen Sophie in danger and her body had moved without asking permission from her brain. "She's a good girl," Rosa said quietly in her accented English. "I couldn't let anything happen to her." Robert's eyes filled with tears. He turned back to the window quickly, but not before Rosa saw. This powerful man, this billionaire who commanded boardrooms and ran a global company, was crying. Sophie stayed glued to Rosa's side all evening. When the doctor finally discharged Rosa with instructions to rest for a few days, Sophie held her hand walking to the car. Helen drove them back to the estate while Robert followed in his own car. He had canceled his flight to London, canceled all his meetings for the week. His assistant had called 3 times trying to understand what was happening, but Robert just kept saying it would have to wait. Back at the house, Robert did something that shocked everyone. He told Helen to prepare one of the guest rooms on the 2nd floor for Rosa, the nice guest rooms. The ones for important visitors, not the small staff quarters where Rosa usually slept. Helen's mouth opened in surprise, but she caught herself and just nodded. Rosa tried to protest. She didn't need a fancy room. Her own small room was perfectly fine. But Robert insisted, and Rosa was too exhausted to argue. The guest room was bigger than her entire apartment back in Guatemala. It had a massive bed with soft white sheets, a private bathroom with marble counters, a sitting area with a television. Rosa stood in the doorway, feeling completely out of place. This wasn't for someone like her. This was for important people, but Sophie pulled her inside, chattering about how this room was right next to hers, how they could have breakfast together in the morning, how Rosa could rest and get better. The girl seemed happier than Rosa had ever seen her, despite everything that had happened. Or maybe because of it. Maybe Sophie was just relieved to have someone close, someone who had proven they would protect her no matter what. That night, Rosa lay in the enormous bed, her body aching, her mind racing. She called her mother in Guatemala, needing to hear her voice. Her mother cried when Rosa told her what had happened, switching rapidly between pride and worry the way only mothers can. "You could have died," her mother said in Spanish. "You could have left your own children without a mother." "I know," Rosa whispered. "But Mama, you should have seen her face. She was so scared. I couldn't think about anything else." "That's because you have a good heart," her mother said. "Too good sometimes. You're always taking care of everyone else's children while your own wait for you." The words hit Rosa hard because they were true. Anna and Lise had been waiting for 3 years. They were growing up without her, and she was growing attached to someone else's child. It wasn't fair to anyone, but life wasn't fair. That was something Rosa had learned a long time ago, after she hung up. She lay in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the big house at night. Her arms hurt. Her shoulder throbbed. But she was alive, and Sophie was safe, and somehow that felt like enough. She didn't know that down the hall. Robert was sitting in his study, unable to sleep, watching the security footage of the attack over and over. He watched Rosa run. He watched her grab Sophie. He watched her fight the dog with everything she had. He watched his daughter's life being saved by a woman he had never really noticed before today. He thought about Catherine, about what she would say if she could see him now. She had always told him he worked too much, that he was missing Sophie's childhood, that money couldn't replace time. He had always planned to slow down eventually. Eventually never came. Today, a woman he barely knew had risked her life for his daughter without hesitation. A woman who earned a fraction of what he made in an hour. A woman who had left her own children behind to support them. A woman he had treated as invisible. Robert put his head in his hands. He had been sleepwalking through his own life, through his daughter's life. It had taken a near tragedy to wake him up. But he was awake now. And things were going to change. He just had to figure out how to make it right. How to thank someone who had given everything when he had given so little. How to be the father his daughter needed instead of just the one who paid the bills. Outside, the night was quiet and still. The garden where the attack had happened looked peaceful in the moonlight, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But everything had changed. They all knew it. Even if they couldn't yet see how far those changes would reach. The story hit the local news the next morning. Someone at the party had recorded video on their phone. Catching the moment, Rosa ran across the lawn and threw herself between Sophie and the dog. The footage was shaky and far away, but clear enough. Within hours, it was everywhere. "Heroic housekeeper saves billionaire's daughter," the headlines read. Rosa's face was suddenly on television screens and computer monitors across the city. Reporters showed up at the estate gates, wanting interviews. The housekeeping agency she worked for called 6 times in one day. Everyone wanted to talk to the brave maid who had risked everything. Rosa hated every second of it. She stayed in the guest room, her arms still bandaged, watching the coverage with growing discomfort. They were making her into something she wasn't. A hero. A saint. She was just a woman who had done what needed to be done. Any mother would have done the same thing, but Robert's assistant kept fielding calls from news stations, talk shows, even a publisher who wanted Rosa to write a book about her experience. Rosa refused everything. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to heal and go back to work and send money home to her children like always. Robert came to see her on the second day. He knocked on the door softly, and when Rosa said to come in, he entered carrying a tray with tea and fresh pastries from the kitchen. He set it down on the small table by the window and sat in the chair across from her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," Rosa said. It was mostly true. The pain had dulled to a constant ache. The scratches were healing. Her shoulder was a spectacular mess of purple and yellow bruises, but the doctor said it would be fine in a week or two. Robert nodded, looking uncomfortable. He seemed different than before. Smaller somehow, despite being the same man in the same expensive clothes. He kept starting to say something and then stopping, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Finally, he spoke. "I need to tell you something." "Something I should have said years ago," Rosa waited, confused. "I didn't know your name until yesterday," Robert said quietly. 3 years you've worked in my house, and I didn't know your name. I had to ask Helen. She had to tell me it was Rosa Martinez." "That's unforgivable." Rosa didn't know what to say. She had known he didn't notice her. All the wealthy people were like that. It wasn't personal. It was just how things were. "Helen told me other things too," Robert continued. "She told me you have 2 children in Guatemala, that you left them to come here and work, that you send almost all your money home, that you cry every Sunday after your video calls with them." Rosa's cheeks burned. She hadn't realized Helen had noticed those things. She had tried so hard to keep her personal life separate. "She also told me," Robert said, his voice getting rougher, "that you've been the only person who really pays attention to Sophie, that you sneak her treats and make her lunch and listen to her stories, that my daughter lights up when she sees you, even though you're not supposed to interact with her beyond basic courtesy." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to Rosa. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I've been a terrible father. Catherine died and I just buried myself in work. I told myself Sophie was being taken care of, that she had everything she needed. I convinced myself that providing financially was enough. But you showed me yesterday what real love looks like. Real protection. Real sacrifice." He turned to face her, and Rosa was startled to see tears on his cheeks. "You have your own children waiting for you across the border. Children you haven't held in 3 years. And you still threw yourself in front of a dangerous animal to save mine. What does that say about me? What kind of father does it make me that a woman earning minimum wage cares more about my daughter's safety than I do?" Mr. Chun, Rosa started, but he held up his hand. Please let me finish. I've been thinking about this for 2 days straight. I watched the security footage maybe 50 times. I watched you run. I saw your face. You didn't hesitate for even a second. And I realized something that made me sick to my stomach. If I had been standing where you were, I don't know if I would have run. I don't know if I would have been brave enough. Rosa shook her head. You would have. She's your daughter, is she? Robert asked bitterly. I mean, yes, biologically. But what have I actually been to her? An absentee landlord? I see her maybe an hour a day when I'm not traveling. Helen tucks her in at night. Helen helps with her homework. Helen knows her favorite foods and her bad dreams and what makes her laugh. I just pay the bills? He sat down again, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. You saved Sophie's life, and that's a debt I can never repay. But you also woke me up. You made me see what I've become. And I can't go back to sleepwalking through my daughter's childhood. I won't? Rosa felt tears stinging her own eyes now. She thought about Anna and Lise, about how much of their lives she had already missed. First days of school, lost teeth, birthday parties. She had chosen to miss those things for money, just like Robert had chosen to miss Sophie's life for his company. Maybe they weren't so different after all. What will you do? She asked softly. I don't know yet, Robert admitted. But I'm starting by taking the rest of the month off work. My board is furious, but I don't care. I need to be here. I need to learn how to be Sophie's father again, not just the man who owns the house she lives in. He looked at Rosa directly, his eyes red but determined. And I want to do something for you. Something meaningful. The hospital bills are covered, obviously. But that's not enough. Not nearly enough. Mr. Chun, you don't have to. Please, let me do this. I've already spoken with my lawyers. I want to set up a fund for your children's education. Full scholarships from elementary school through university, whatever they want to study. And I want to help bring your family here legally. Green cards for you and your children and your mother. So you don't have to choose anymore between supporting them and being with them. Rosa's breath caught. She stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. It was too much. It wasn't possible. Things like that didn't happen to people like her. I can't accept that, she whispered. It's too much. It's not enough, Robert said firmly. Rosa, you gave me my daughter's life. You gave her a future. Let me give your children theirs. Please. Rosa's hands were shaking. She thought about Anna, who wanted to be a doctor but probably never would because they couldn't afford university. She thought about Luis, who loved drawing, but whose notebooks were always half empty because new ones cost too much. She thought about her mother, whose arthritis was getting worse but who couldn't afford the medication that might help. I also want to offer you a different position, Robert continued. Not as a housekeeper. As Sophie's companion, officially, triple your current salary, full benefits, your own cottage on the property. You'd spend time with her, help with her education, be the steady presence she needs. The presence she's been missing since Catherine died. Rosa couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. This was impossible. This didn't happen in real life. People like her didn't get fairy tale endings. Think about it, Robert said, standing. You don't have to decide now. Take time to heal, rest, but know that the offer is real, and it stands for as long as you need to consider it. He walked to the door, then paused and looked back. Thank you, Rosa, for everything. For seeing my daughter when I was blind. For loving her when I was too busy. For saving her when I couldn't. You've given me a second chance to be the father I should have been all along. After he left, Rosa sat in the luxurious guest room, her mind spinning. Through the window, she could see Sophie playing in the garden with Helen watching nearby. The girl looked up at the window and waved. A huge smile on her face when she saw Rosa. Rosa waved back, tears streaming down her cheeks. Happy tears this time? Hopeful tears. Maybe impossible things did happen sometimes. Maybe courage and love could change everything. Maybe, just maybe, She wouldn't have to choose anymore between the children she had left behind and the child she had learned to love here. Maybe they could all be together. Maybe this could really be home. 6 months passed before Rosa truly believed it was real. The first month was the hardest. Rosa kept waiting for Robert to change his mind, to realize he had made his offer in a moment of emotion and take it back. She had seen wealthy people make promises before. Promises that evaporated once the crisis passed and life returned to normal, but Robert didn't take it back. His lawyers worked on the immigration paperwork. His accountants set up the education fund. And Robert himself showed up every morning at breakfast, sitting with Sophie, asking about her dreams, listening to her rambling stories about her dolls and the birds in the garden. Rosa watched this transformation with cautious hope. Robert wasn't perfect at it. He still checked his phone too much. He still took business calls during dinner sometimes. But he was trying. Really trying. And Sophie bloomed under the attention like a flower finally getting water after a long drought. The cottage Robert had prepared for Rosa was small but beautiful, tucked in a quiet corner of the estate near the old oak trees. 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, a living room with big windows. Rosa walked through it a dozen times, touching the furniture. Still unable to believe it was hers, her mother was the first to arrive. Rosa picked her up from the airport on a cold November morning, and when she saw her mother coming through the arrival gate, she broke down crying right there in the terminal. 3 years. 3 years since she had hugged her mother. 3 years since she had seen her face in person instead of through a phone screen. Her mother looked older. Her hair was more gray, her hands more twisted from the arthritis. But her eyes were the same, warm and knowing, and when she wrapped Rosa in her arms, Rosa felt like a child again. "Mia," her mother whispered, crying too. "Mia, you're here. You're really here." They drove back to the estate, Rosa's mother staring out the window at everything, overwhelmed by the size of the buildings, the traffic, the sheer foreignness of it all. When Rosa showed her the cottage, her mother walked through each room silently, touching the walls like she couldn't believe they were solid. "This is yours?" she asked finally. "This whole place?" "Our whole place," Rosa corrected. "You'll have your own room. We'll have a home together again." Her mother sat down on the sofa and wept. The children came 2 months later. The paperwork had taken longer than expected, but Robert's lawyers pushed it through. Anna was 12 now, Luis was 10, and when Rosa saw them walking toward her at the airport, she almost couldn't breathe. They were so big. When had they gotten so big? Anna was almost as tall as Rosa, her face losing its baby roundness, turning into something beautiful and mature. Luis had lost his front teeth and grown them back, and Rosa had missed it. She had missed watching that happen. "Mama," Anna said. And then she was running and Luis was running. And they crashed into Rosa all at once. All 3 of them crying and laughing and holding on so tight. Rosa sank to the floor right there in the middle of the airport, her arms around both her children. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt complete. The broken pieces of her heart that she had been carrying around trying to pretend weren't missing suddenly snapped back into place. Luis pulled back first, his face wet with tears but smiling. "Mama, you're crushing me," he said, and Rosa laughed, a sound of pure joy. The drive home was chaos. Luis talked nonstop, telling her about school and his friends and the stray cat he had been feeding. Anna was quieter, sitting in the back seat, holding Rosa's hand over the seat as if she needed to keep touching her to make sure she was real. At the cottage, Rosa's mother was waiting with hot chocolate and the quesadillas she had spent the afternoon preparing. The small house filled with Spanish and laughter and the smell of home cooking. Rosa kept looking around at her family, all of them together under one roof for the first time in 3 years, and had to keep wiping away tears. Sophie came over that evening, shy at first, holding Helen's hand. Rosa introduced her children to Sophie, worried about how they would react to each other. But children are better at these things than adults. Within 10 minutes, Sophie was showing Luis her collection of rocks from the garden, and Anna was braiding Sophie's hair while telling her about their grandmother's village in Guatemala. Robert stopped by too. "Bringing a welcome gift?" A ridiculous amount of groceries he had ordered because he wasn't sure what Rosa's family liked to eat. He looked nervous, standing at the door of the cottage, as if he wasn't sure he was welcome in this space that he owned, but that felt like Rosa's territory now. Rosa's mother invited him in and insisted he try her quesadillas. Robert sat at the small kitchen table, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit, eating quesadillas with Rosa's family while the children played in the next room. But he smiled more genuinely than Rosa had ever seen him smile, and when he left an hour later, he thanked her mother 3 times for the food. The months that followed were an adjustment for everyone. Anna and Lise enrolled in the local school, struggling at first with English but picking it up faster than Rosa expected. Her mother turned the cottage into a real home, filling it with cooking smells and plants, and the comfortable clutter of family life. Rosa's new position with Sophie was strange at first. She wasn't quite a nanny, wasn't quite a tutor, wasn't quite a family friend. She was something new, something they were all figuring out together. She spent mornings with Sophie, helping with her studies, taking her on walks around the property, listening to her worries and dreams. Sophie and Lise became inseparable. They were almost the same age, and they invented elaborate games in the garden, built forts in the old oak trees, and created their own language of inside jokes. Anna, being older, sometimes joined them, but often preferred to read or help Rosa's mother in the cottage kitchen. Robert continued his transformation, though it wasn't always smooth. He had moments of backsliding, times when work consumed him again, and Sophie felt neglected. But Rosa gently called him out when it happened, reminding him of the promises he had made. And Robert listened. He was learning, slowly, that being present was harder than being successful, but infinitely more important. On a spring afternoon, nearly 8 months after the dog attack, Rosa stood in the garden watching all 5 children play together. Sophie, Lise, and Anna had been joined by 2 neighbor kids, and their laughter filled the air like music. Rosa's mother sat on a bench nearby. Smiling despite the pain in her hands, Robert walked up beside Rosa, hands in his pockets. "Watching the children too. I never thanked you properly," he said quietly. Rosa glanced at him, confused. "You've thanked me 100 times. You've given my family everything." "Not for saving Sophie," Robert said. "I mean, yes, for that too. But I meant for saving me. For showing me what I was becoming. For giving me a chance to be better." Rosa didn't know what to say to that. She looked back at the children, at Sophie shrieking with laughter as Louise chased her around the fountain, at Anna helping the younger ones climb a tree. "You saved yourself," Rosa said finally. "You chose to change. That was you, not me." "Maybe," Robert said. "But you showed me it was possible. You showed me what love looks like when it's real and not just theoretical. When it's brave enough to risk everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play. The dog that had attacked Sophie had come from a neighbor's yard where it had been kept in poor conditions and eventually escaped. The neighbor faced charges and the dog had been removed. The fence had been repaired and reinforced. Life had moved on, but the impact of that terrible afternoon rippled out in ways no one could have predicted. A moment of violence had cracked open something in all of them, letting light into the dark places where they had been hiding from themselves and each other. Rosa thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago. Invisible, lonely, separated from her children, loving Sophie from a distance because she wasn't allowed to love her up close. That woman felt like a stranger now. She thought about Robert, who had been so lost in his work that he had forgotten his own daughter's face, who had walked through his own life like a ghost, present but not really there. He was different now too. Still learning, still stumbling sometimes, but awake, and Sophie. Sweet Sophie, who had been so alone despite being surrounded by people. She ran past them now, her face bright with joy, chasing after Lise, shouting something in the mixture of English and Spanish. The kids had started speaking together. Lise turned and caught Rosa's eye from across the garden. He waved at her, that huge smile on his face, the smile she had missed so much, and Rosa waved back. Her son here, with her. Not separated by distance and phone screens, but real and close enough to hug whenever she wanted, Anna called out that dinner would be ready soon, and Rosa's mother stood up slowly, heading back toward the cottage. The children started meandering that direction too, still laughing, still playing, not wanting the day to end. Rosa turned to head back too, but Robert stopped her. "Rosa," he said, "thank you for everything. For being brave. For being kind. For seeing us when we couldn't see ourselves. Thank you." Rosa smiled at him, this man who had learned to be human again, who had learned that money couldn't buy the things that actually mattered. "You're welcome," she said simply, and then she walked toward the cottage, toward the sound of her children's voices, toward the smell of her mother's cooking, toward the home she had built from courage and love and one moment of impossible bravery. Behind her, the garden was peaceful in the evening light, the place where everything had changed, the place where one woman's split-second decision had altered the course of multiple lives. Sometimes, Rosa thought, the smallest moments hold the biggest transformations. Sometimes courage looks like running toward danger instead of away from it. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, doing the right thing in the hardest moment brings you exactly where you were meant to be all along. Home.